B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Wednesday, March 29th, 2017. This is my free daily news and comment podcast. It's available on YouTube, on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spreaker, lots of other places too, including that site in Germany that serves up my podcast every day. So, yesterday Donald Trump, with some flourish, signed another one of those executive orders. This time he went to the Environmental Protection Agency's offices and staged the photo op with out-of-work coal miners. And you've probably heard the expression, whistling past the graveyard. It roughly means that somebody is wishing for something that obviously cannot happen. And this is a case of whistling past the coal mines. And it's interesting because, Trump talks about how he loves the free market. And he wants to lift these onerous regulations that tie the hands of business people and just let them do their thing. What's ironic is that the market has already spoken. And coal is dead. Now, sure, we're still digging it out of the ground. We still have electric power generating plants that are using coal. But it is declining sharply. And it is market forces and automation that have put those coal miners out of work. And so the dream, the, dramatic and kind of grandiose claims that Trump offers about his powers to single-handedly restore the coal industry to where it was maybe 10 years ago, and to single-handedly decree that coal miners are going to go back into those pits and dig the black stuff out of the ground, well, it's bullshit. And you don't have to believe me. Let's talk to, or let's hear from, some of the industry leaders. Here's Mark Bowling, Executive Vice President of Southwestern Energy, a major natural gas and oil producer. He says the market drives these things, and we still plan to drive methane emissions down because we think it's part of our core business to be as efficient as possible in removing natural gas from the ground and getting it to our customers. We're definitely going to do that, even though the requirements were lifted or are in the process of being lifted. Some of these rulemaking efforts take several years to go through the bureaucracy. But Trump has triggered this. And industry leaders are saying, we're not really going to benefit that much. A recent report from the stock market analyst Morningstar concludes that state mandates will continue to push the growth of renewables and that efficiency upgrades in technology to generate natural gas will make it even harder for aging coal plants to compete. Now, it's fair to say that the Obama rules never actually took effect. And so the claim that the war on coal is, all the way underway, that's also bullshit. The war on coal has been driven by market forces in the shift to renewables and cleaner burning natural gas when it is properly controlled so that methane doesn't leak all over the place. Now, here's a comment from the CEO of Entergy, a big power plant operator. We think the rule went beyond EPA's statutory authority and infringed on the rights of states to manage the generating fleet, said Leo Denault. That said, the potential of it rolling back does not change our commitment to being environmentally responsible. Now, Mr. Denault there exaggerates, of course, the impact of these rules and also claims that they can be managed at the state level. Well, let me give you an example. I grew up in Cincinnati. It's on the Ohio River. The Ohio River is about a half-mile wide. Kentucky's on the other side. There's a huge power plant in New Richmond, about, 7-8 miles upriver from Cincinnati, that spews its coal effluent on a daily basis. You want to tell me that's not an interstate issue? That regulations in Kentucky cannot put a finger on the smokestacks across the river in Ohio? And Kentucky, then, is at the mercy, at least in this case, of Ohio's willingness to regulate the effluent from its smokestacks. So the departure from reality here is breathtaking. And the true cost to Americans and to other residents of the planet, I think, is hard to estimate. But it's huge. The intangibles are here that essentially Trump has identified terms that are so deeply in conflict with the Paris Climate Change Accord that the U.S. is essentially announcing that it's opting out. And over at Vice News, they took a look at who benefits from this decision. And it's a lot of people who kicked in cash to the Trump campaign and the Republican Party. Ohio-based Murray Energy, the largest coal company in the country, gave its biggest donations of political nature last year ever. $250,000 to the Cleveland Host Committee for the Republican National Convention, $200,000 to a pro-Trump super PAC, $100,000 to the Trump Victory Campaign, and the company gave zero to Democrats. Another competitor, Joe Kraft, the CEO of Alliance Resource Partners, the third largest producer of coal in the East, gave $2 million to pro-Trump super PACs. Now, in return, the coal industry got two things it's been wanting: rolled back emissions limits on the coal-fired power plants and reopening coal mining on public lands with low-cost leases. Now, the federal government charges far below market rates for coal extraction from public lands, and Greenpeace has calculated that in 2014, let me take that back. They announced their calculation in 2014, and it's not confined to 1 year. They say that coal leases had already cost the public between $52 billion and $530 billion just during the Obama administration. And Greenpeace Representative Diana Best said it's welfare for coal. So the other benefits to the coal donors include the repealing of the EPA's stream protection rule, which means when they blow off the top of a mountain and extract the coal, they don't have to clean up the creeks that flow into the hollers there in West Virginia and other places, and just leave the landscape scarred forever. And, of course, the impact on people who choose to live there is pretty dire. So Vice goes on to say here, despite Trump's talk of bringing back coal jobs, his executive orders are unlikely to do more than temporarily pad the profit margins of coal companies. Coal has been declining for years, having gone from about half of the U.S. electricity production 10 years ago to 1/3 today. So the genie's out of the bottle, the horse has left the barn, but hey, Trump needs a win. And we are the losers. Blistering editorial from the New York Times today headlined, "President Trump Risks the Planet." Only 10 weeks into his presidency and at great risk to future generations, Trump has ordered the demolition of most of Obama's policies to combat climate change by reducing emissions from fossil fuels. They note that he surrounded himself with cabinet officers who know or care little about the issue of global warming and who in many cases owe their political success to the largesse of the oil, gas, and coal companies. Yes, they are the wrecking crew, and many of them come from the resource extraction sectors. The Times goes on, it was dismaying because it repudiated the rock-solid scientific consensus that without swift action, the consequences of climate change are likely to get steadily worse. It was dismaying because it reaffirmed the administration's support for older, dirtier energy sources when all the economic momentum and new investment lies with newer, cleaner forms of energy. And it was dismaying because it flew in the face of widespread public support for environmental protection, including the pleas of the executives of hundreds of major American corporations who fear that without energy innovation, their costs will rise, their competitive edge over foreign companies will be lost. But we've also essentially relinquished any leadership role in addressing climate change. We are essentially saying to the Chinese, we're not going to follow the agreements that we made, and we certainly wouldn't expect you to either. And this, of course, is pretty disastrous when we look at it in the longer term. Meanwhile, Westinghouse, a once respected American brand, Westinghouse made home appliances. They had a radio and television division that was one of the best operators in the old days. And unfortunately, Westinghouse also was a leader in the construction of nuclear power plants and the also manufacturing of the nuclear reactors. And a few years ago, the Japanese heavy equipment company Toshiba took over Westinghouse, and yesterday they filed for bankruptcy. Actually, they did it today. And they are claiming at least $6 billion in losses because of cost overruns on the two plants that it's building in Georgia and South Carolina. Now, if you're a longtime listener, you've heard my skepticism when the Obama administration announced that, we believe in an all-of-the-above energy strategy. They used the words clean coal, too, just like Trump did yesterday. And so, while Obama did address climate change rhetorically, and he did advance some significant policies to address climate change, he also approved more offshore drilling even after the blowout of the Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico. And he supported the construction of these two new nuke generating plants. And so did some greenies. Stuart Brand and other longtime environmentalists said that they believe that nuclear power, despite the risks of nuclear waste and despite the inability to control costs of construction, that they're a better bet because they don't produce any carbon emissions. And I haven't bought into that because they cannot build a power plant within the cost projections. And we haven't dealt with the nuclear waste. And we have decommissioned power plants, or we're in the process of decommissioning Diablo Canyon. We've already shut down San Onofre here in California. And we're going to live with the nuclear waste on site at these coastal, these are beachfront locations. We're going to live with that for hundreds of years. So this bankruptcy, I think, is a strong signal that nuclear power is not financially viable. And we've got to stop pretending that it's neutral in terms of the environment, because I simply don't believe that. Washington continues to be embroiled in the Trump-Russia scandal. The latest today is a Republican Congressman, Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania, has accepted that the House Intelligence Committee is so tainted by the actions of Chair Devin Nunes that he thinks that they should allow the Senate Intelligence Committee to handle the investigation into Trump-Russia, and the House committee should stand down. Well, I don't support this either, because Richard Burr is the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and just like Nunes, he went public trying to defend Trump. He has been pretty quiet since the tweets from Trump claiming that Obama wiretapped him. But Richard Burr is the guy who killed the Senate torture report. He's a monster. And you cannot rely on him, especially since he did carry water for the White House back in January. You can't count on him any more than you can Nunes. And Nunes is now acting more like a dictator, because he's just kind of telling his committee when it will meet, when it won't. They skipped a regular weekly meeting this week. He canceled a hearing that was scheduled for yesterday that would have featured former Assistant Attorney General Sally Yates and the two top spooks under Obama, Brennan and Clapper. He didn't consult with even his Republican colleagues, to my knowledge, in making those calls. And there's supposed to be, he says that he's waiting for Comey, the FBI director, to schedule a closed-door session with the House Intelligence Committee to expand on the comments he made a week ago in the public session. But Nunes is operating in such an autocratic way, and he is compromised by his dealings with the White House, by his refusal to disclose this murky meeting on the White House campus where he got to a peek at some super intelligence that's so secret that he can't tell anybody about it. And over on the Senate side, Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat in the Intel Committee, told reporters that if Nunes is onto something with the information he got from his White House visit, It's a mystery to every other intelligence investigator in the Capitol. Warner said none of us, Republican or Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, has any idea what he's talking about. Now to the original claims that Russia hacked the servers of the Democratic National Committee and was responsible for getting the emails of John Podesta and gave all that stuff to WikiLeaks. Well, two recent articles of note I'm linking to in the show file for today's podcast. Last week over at Counterpunch, Michael Senato wrote a piece challenging the credibility of CrowdStrike. That is the cybersecurity firm that was hired by the DNC to investigate this, and within hours they said, oh yeah, Russia did it. Now, this same CrowdStrike has a $150 million contract with the FBI. And yet CrowdStrike and the DNC never permitted the FBI to examine the servers that they say were hacked by Russia. And now CrowdStrike is under fire because it issued a separate report related to Ukraine's cyber war with Russia during the Crimea episode a couple of years ago. And a new report sheds skepticism on CrowdStrike's findings and the objectivity of their conclusions. Officials at the CIA, former CIA and NSA officials have cast doubt on, especially given the several media outlets reported in January of this year that the DNC never allowed the FBI to examine the servers themselves. So the spooks, the FBI, CIA, and NSA, that issued a statement in October and a really laughable report in January, they rely for their public claims on CrowdStrike. And CrowdStrike is hardly credible. The firm's CTO, Chief Technical Officer, and co-founder is Dmitry Alperovich, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, a think tank with an openly anti-Russian sentiment. And it's funded by Ukrainian billionaire Viktor Pinchuk. So, as you look at this, that forms the basis for a more recent piece that was published on March 26 under the byline of Tyler Durden at Zero Hedge. I've linked to it so you can read it. His headline reads, "The evidence that Russia hacked the DNC is collapsing." And he walks us through the CrowdStrike claims, raises the same issues that I just shared with you from the Counterpunch story. And initially, CrowdStrike gauged its certainty as to the identity of the hackers with medium confidence. However, a later development announced in December and touted by the Washington Post boosted this to high confidence because of the discovery that Fancy Bear had also infected an application used by the Ukrainian military, and I referred to that a moment ago as well. So CrowdStrike is hardly independent, unbiased, and the fact that they have this contract with the FBI is a real head-scratcher for a guy like me. Let me quote again here from the Zero Hedge article. "The definitive evidence cited by Alperovich is now effectively debunked. Indeed, it was debunked late last year, but that was ignored in the media's rush to prove the Russians hacked the DNC in order to further Trump's presidential ambitions. The exposure by Voice of America of CrowdStrike's falsification of Ukrainian battlefield losses, the supposedly solid proof of attributing the hack to the Russian GRU, is the final nail in CrowdStrike's coffin." And there's one more item here. This last little tidbit about the FBI and their $150,000 a year no-bid contract with CrowdStrike. Well, the FBI's complete dependence on CrowdStrike's analysis. And yesterday I shared with you, and if you didn't hear it, please go back and listen, the original reporting by WhoWhatWhy.com, arguing that the FBI is compromised by its long-term investigations of Russian mobsters, including many who have offices and residences at Trump Tower, some of whom have personal relationships with Donald Trump himself. There's a lot to chew on here. We'll keep chewing. Every day, I like to pause for a second and thank the people who make all this possible. by your subscriptions to the Peter B. Collins podcast. Deborah Madera just renewed her annual subscription. Thanks, Deborah. Natalie Reel, Ian Berman, Ethan Knox, they are monthly contributors who kick in $5 each. Can you afford $5 a month to keep this independent voice in your ear? Well, if you answered yes, come on over to peterbcollins.com. You'll find the menu button. Click on that, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page. Your options are there, $5, $10, $20 a month. We've got bonus books for new annual subscribers. And I often fail to mention the beautiful and simple Peter B. Collins podcast app. It's available at the Apple App Store for just $2.99, and it brings you our podcast every day on your iPhone or iPad. Now, I'm coming to accept a notion that I've resisted for a long time, and that is that we really don't have any privacy anymore. There are video cameras everywhere. Our activities on the Internet, our phone calls, they're all captured by somebody, and sometimes they're captured by a whole lot of different people. We know that Google and Facebook are constantly harvesting data about us and then serving us ads. You may know last weekend I went to Los Angeles, and when I, searched for airfares, I looked at United, I looked at Southwest, I looked at JetBlue, and now the only ads I'm seeing are for those airlines. They seem to forget that I've already taken the trip, and they should know that, right? Because they know everything. Well, Trump is prepared to sign a bill that came out of the Senate last week and was approved Tuesday afternoon by the Republican-controlled House. And what it does is allow the Internet service providers, typically telephone companies and cable companies, to harvest your browsing history and then sell it to advertisers so that they can serve ads to you. This is a route to profit-taking, and it's also a competitive edge that the online social media and search engines have had for years. They're allowed to harvest data because they operate under the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. The phone companies and others operate partially under the rules of the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. So what this bill does is basically embrace the looser standards of the FTC, which means that the phone companies can look at the sites that you browse and send that information in what they consider to be a non-sensitive way. And I don't know if that includes browsing for porn or sports or things about health concerns that you'd like to keep private. But the definition of sensitive information is different in the FCC than it is in the FTC. And I've linked to a great story written by Sam Biddle at The Intercept, as he asked a simple question of the lobbyists for the phone companies. Is this going to enhance the privacy of your customers? And it's fun and fascinating to read. I'm not going to drag you through it here on the podcast, but browse over and take a look at this, because Biddle was quite persistent with the publicist or the PR person named Joy Sims. And Joy kept dodging his question and sending him news releases saying, this will answer your question, even though she knew that they wouldn't. And so the bottom line is he ends up on a conference call with other reporters and a number of executives and lawyers and lobbyists for the phone companies, and they continue to dodge the question. And so you can presume that the answer is that these moves will not enhance consumer privacy. Privacy is also at issue in charges that have been filed by California's Attorney General against David Daleiden and Sandra Merritt. They were the two who used hidden cameras at a pro-abortion conference held in San Francisco in April of 2014. And the videos they shot and selectively edited have been used to try to take down Planned Parenthood, claiming that they traded in aborted fetal tissues. This is a replay of what they did to Acorn. It was a guy named James O'Keefe who did that to Acorn, and Daleiden is following in those ugly footsteps. And I have to say that while these videos were obviously selectively edited and they set these people up, And we now know that there are issues about whether it was legal to shoot the videos in the first place. Doesn't matter. It is the fodder that the right wing has used to demonize Planned Parenthood and to fuel the efforts, including in the failed Obamacare repeal bill, to take money away from Planned Parenthood. It's really insidious, cynical, and truly ugly. Well, today is the day that British Prime Minister Theresa May, who has yet to be elected to her job, sent formal notice of Brexit to the European Union. They filed a document under Section 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, which triggers a 2-year process for Britain to negotiate its exit from the European Union. It's going to be thorny because the open borders that Britain has enjoyed cut both ways. There are British citizens who live on the continent and people from the continent who live in Britain. Their status is unclear. Their ability to travel back and forth is going to be curtailed. And then there are, of course, the commerce and revenue issues. And Britain seems to think that it will be able to negotiate a relationship with the European Union that will just favor Britain and allow it to control its borders. But that's very unclear at this point. And I want to recommend a piece that I've linked to in the show file for today's podcast by my friend and colleague, Andy Worthington. He's the British journalist who has done such an exceptional job covering our gulag at Guantanamo. And in a post the other day, he noted that 9 months ago, the EU referendum, which was approved by a narrow majority, 37.4% of the eligible voters in the UK, that's 37.4, 34.7 voted to remain, and 28% didn't vote. So he notes that this is the will of a minority and that it was originally described as an advisory measure. Nonetheless, people in Parliament have basically just gotten out of the way. They're afraid of the Trump factor. They don't want to be on the wrong side of an angry mob. And Andy notes that Theresa May, who had been the Home Secretary when David Cameron resigned after losing Brexit, she was nominated by just 199 members of Parliament and became Prime Minister. She has never stood for election. And I can tell this is one way the British system works, but I never knew about this, and it is bizarre. And Andy goes on to say that Theresa May, with the assistance of Brexit ministers, has decided that they will decide everything about how it will take place without consulting Parliament at all. And after a court case, they lost a case in the British Supreme Court. She continues to take this high-handed position, and it's going to be quite a 2-year process. Now, this is not on the same scale as Brexit, but I'm calling it Rexit. The city of Oakland has been subject to serial extortion by an NFL team called the Raiders. The Raiders extorted Oakland when they first broke their lease and moved to Los Angeles in the 1990s. In 1995, they agreed to return to Oakland and extorted hundreds of millions of dollars out of the city of Oakland and the county of Alameda. And the Raiders got approval the other day from the NFL owners to pack up and move to Las Vegas. And they are leaving a huge financial hole behind. First of all, there's $80 million unpaid on the money that was advanced by the city and county to pay for skyboxes for the Raiders at the demand of the late owner Al Davis. Then there were $200 million in taxpayer-backed bonds used to remodel the stadium. The tab to pay that off is $350 million, and the impoverished city of Oakland and the county will be paying that off for another 8 or 10 years. In addition, the Warriors, the basketball team, has notified Oakland that it's leaving the Coliseum and is moving to San Francisco As soon as their new arena is built, it'll be about 2 or 3 years, and there's a $68 billion unpaid tab remaining there. And it just infuriates me that these professional sports teams are able to extort so damn much money from these cities. And I don't see any end to it in sight, even though I'd like to. Well, Hillary came to San Francisco yesterday. The Democratic failed presidential candidate from 2008 and 2016 gave a speech to the annual Professional Business Women of California. Now, what's unusual is we don't know if she was paid or not, but the speech was not secret. And we don't even need to wait for WikiLeaks to release the transcripts. She allowed press coverage and videotapes. She was on stage for about an hour. One of her quips was, "There's no place I'd rather be than here with you, other than the White House." Her new mantra is resist, persist, insist, enlist. And it really pains me to see so many women who still identify with Hillary Clinton, who still yearn for her to become president. And I'm reminded of the great tune by the late Dan Hicks. How can we miss you if you won't go away? Nate Cohn over at the New York Times has crunched the numbers again based on the voter files that have been released recently from the November elections and concludes that Democratic turnout was not the cause of Hillary Clinton's loss. It was Democratic turncoats. Large numbers of white working-class voters shifted from the Democrats to Trump. Almost 1 in 4 of President Obama's 2012 white working-class supporters defected from the Democrats, either supporting Trump or voting for a third-party candidate. Now, some of the lower turnout that was reported, in my view, is a reflection of successful Republican voter suppression tactics. People who showed up, but their vote didn't count. And so when I see people doing these contortions to blame Russia, to blame everything else except Hillary Clinton and the Democrats for a lousy campaign based on the wrong issues and really the wrong profile in a year of change, it's sad to see how far down they go, trying to say it wasn't her fault. I am opening in front of your ears this fundraising letter that I just got from the Democratic National Committee yesterday. It is my 2017 membership acceptance form, and it comes with a paid return envelope. I will return it and announce my rejection. I am not going to accept any membership in the Democratic Party. Their computer systems, those servers that got hacked by somebody, well, apparently they noted that I registered as a Democrat in order to vote for Bernie Sanders in the primary here last June, and they didn't notice that I immediately left the Democratic Party and re-registered as no party preference. I love the approach that Julia Carey Wong, a San Francisco-based writer for The Guardian, took to the article she wrote about the extension of the deadline to submit a proposal, a bid, to win a construction contract to build Trump's wall on the southern border. She said the process here is the first step that promises to combine 3 of Trump's most successful ventures: beauty pageants, reality TV competitions, and xenophobia. Think of it, she says, as a swimsuit competition followed by a high-stakes apprentice challenge. Those who can withstand the battering ram for at least 90 minutes while also being aesthetically pleasing on the U.S. side have a shot at winning a lucrative piece of one of the largest infrastructure projects in decades. Now, here are some of the terms. All proposals must meet some standards, including being physically imposing in height with anti-climb features and aesthetically pleasing color on the north side. Now, wait a minute. Mexico's supposed to pay for the wall. Don't they even get to pick their color on the south-facing side? And shouldn't it be aesthetically pleasing, too? Because Trump has promised us this wall will be beautiful. What's interesting is that a number of companies are submitting bids that are not for the wall that Trump dreams of. Integrated Security Corporation will submit a proposal for a 2-chain-link fence system with a no-man's land in between, just like they put around high-security prisons. Simularity, an artificial intelligence company, is proposing an invisible or virtual wall that uses artificial intelligence software to analyze satellite and surveillance imagery to identify unusual activities. Steve Speaks, CEO of Kalmar Rough Terrain Center, has an alternative idea. He wants to stack shipping containers along the border. So far, no large multinational construction companies have indicated an interest in bidding. Well, this guy didn't have to climb the walls or the security fencing to get out of a California prison at Calipatria. Because yesterday, Marco Contreras was declared innocent after 20 years behind bars and released from custody. It's the second time this month that lawyers and students from that's Loyola University in Southern California, their law school, have freed an innocent man. And it warms my heart, because justice did eventually occur for Mr. Contreras. And finally today, a laugh line to leave with. You know that in the budget blueprint that the Trump administration released, one of the big cuts is to Meals on Wheels, because whoever that guy is, he said, it just doesn't pencil out. Well, last night on The Daily Show, Trevor Noah and one of his correspondents, Roy Wood Jr., announced that the way to save Meals on Wheels is to militarize it. Then Trump will approve it. He's got budget increases for the military, right? So instead of Meals on Wheels, they're going to call it Meal Team 6. And the video was pretty funny about Meal Team 6 delivering meals. Thanks for joining me for my daily news and comment podcast. It's available every day on YouTube. And I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.